One of the main challenges that early stage companies and founders always face is cash flows. Because after all, cash flow and capital is oxygen for any early stage business. I'm David Gowdey, managing partner at Jungle Ventures, and one of the biggest issues facing early stage companies and founders is cash flows. Many of the founders that we meet have had past experience at large internet companies like Google or Facebook or Grab. And with that, they gain a lot of experience around financials. Most of them are very capable at understanding a P&L because as line managers, they were probably managing a budget within those larger organizations. But unless you're an accountant, and most startup founders are not accountants, you really don't have a firm grasp of all the financial statements. And we see that quite a lot in the companies that we meet. Most of them don't have as good an understanding of cash flows and the balance sheet. But cash flow is actually one of the biggest issues that a company needs to face and tackle as they begin to scale up and start deploying some of the capital that they've been able to raise. Because cash flows and the management of strong cash flows can determine the health or success or failure of a business. And so good management of those cash flows and understanding of where cash is moving, both how it's coming in and how it's going back out again, is super important to businesses at the early stage. So a couple of tips that you can think about for better managing your cash flows. There's obviously lots of different types of businesses and not all businesses are the same. Some types of businesses, for cash flows, you have to think about the cash conversion cycle. So a business may be paying out cash to suppliers in exchange for goods or products that they'll bring into inventory. That inventory is then sold over time to consumers or to buyers and converted back into cash. And the time period that cash is out before it gets converted back into cash is your conversion cycle. And so as you think about managing a budget and day-to-day operational expenses, that cash is obviously off the books in someplace else. Then there's also software companies which may sell subscription services to customers where they're paying a year or two in advance. Now obviously all of that cash comes into the books when the deal is signed. Even though the revenue is on an accrual basis, it gets recognized over the time period of the contract. The cash is all received up front, and that can be used to pay for a lot of the day-to-day operational expenses. So in that business model, you have much better cash generation coming into the business and you're not relying solely on funding that's coming from investors. So all businesses are a little bit different in terms of how cash works, but there's a few tips that I think all businesses can use to ensure that you have an adequate management of how your cash flow is working and being tracked internally. The first tip is, as early as possible, you should try and bring on a controller or a finance manager or someone that has a background in audit or accounting that can help you manage the finances of the business and keep track of the balance sheet, the cash flows, and the P&L. Lots of times founders have a million things going on and 1,000 decisions to make at any given point in time, and they're not always as focused on cash. And so having someone that's dedicated in the business that's only thinking about the financial aspects of the business, I think are super, super important. Second tip is to try and institute a policy around how cash is going out of the business as soon as possible. That could be as simple as what employees are allowed to expense, who can use a credit card, how you're going to manage fraud prevention, and just keep an eye on how the cash is going out of the business and making sure that there's good, solid policies around who can spend which money and how. And then the third tip is most founders are very good at doing a P&L and projecting the P&L out over time. Because like I said, most people have probably had experience managing budgets. And budgets are fantastic, but they also have to be coupled with how cash is flowing in and out of the business. So the third tip is, as you're doing the P&L, also think about doing a projection for cash flows and how much cash is needed to run operations. There's lots of ways as you scale a little bit more that you can fund some of those working capital requirements without having to use equity. It could be convertible notes or it could be venture debt. There are other options that are available to a business as you get a little bit more scale to try and fund some of those working capital requirements, but to have a budget and to know how much cash you actually need. And as we think about the total net burn of a business, it's really about the total cash burn, because it's the cash that's actually going to fund the operations and not necessarily the items that are showing up in our profit and loss statement. So in summary, If you're a little bit more mature of a business, you probably have investors that are going to help you track all of your financial statements. But in earlier stage companies where you tend to have more angel investors or seed stage investors, there may not be as much rigor around the financial statements. But cash management is absolutely critical to the survival of early stage businesses, and there couldn't be a more important topic to talk about at board meetings or with your investors to make sure that those aspects are being managed as best they can. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, give us likes and give us lots of comments and feedback below, and click subscribe so you can access more of our content as we start to create it.